Okay, let's talk practically about what a stewardship plan in a church looks like. Stewardship plans and campaigns are usually done annually in a church along the lines with the way the budget is constructed. Along with the budget, you launch a campaign to raise the funds. Now, how we raise the funds is up to you. There are many different ways of doing that. We must remember, however, that many will pledge and many will not pledge. And our giving should not be tied directly to a 100% pledge system, because that will never happen. But what you want to tie it to is a percentage of people who are giving and a percentage of people who will give without pledging. All of this has to be taken into consideration when you build your budget. What will the people be willing to give, and what can they give? A stewardship campaign should be realistic, but it also should be evangelistic. It should be stretching the limits of what we can do and encouraging people to be greater disciples. So whatever we did last year is good, but don't just base it on whatever happened last year. Base it on a vision that is higher than last year. One of my friends used to say that he would look out on Easter Sunday and he would say to himself, this is what every Sunday can look like by next year if we work at it. When we look at the top budget, the top giving day of the year, that's what your budget can be next year if you stretch for it, and encourage your people to stretch in their giving. Now, that's part of the vision that we have. A vision must be both realistic and it must be optimistic. We must have the backing of a sizable number of our leadership, maybe not 100%, but most of our leadership, before we present it to the congregation. And people in the congregation need to have a piece of that vision as well. Now, leadership, as you're making a budget together and as you're doing the vision of the church, should have some diversity to it. Don't try to get people working on the budget that you all agree with. You sometimes need people with whom you disagree to be involved as well, because they provide a corrective to the vision that you have. If everybody agrees too much, we might become like lemmings and run off the nearest cliff. We need people sometimes who can disagree as well, and your leadership should include that. Now let's talk about what actually goes into a budget, the parts of a budget plan, a stewardship campaign. The first thing we must have is a concrete plan, and Berkeley mentioned several different methods and ways of doing these. There are every member canvas where people go to each home and provide and speak to people one-on-one about their pledges. There are telephone solicitations where people call one another and encourage people to give. There are handwritten notes that go out. Today, I think the internet also ought to be considered in any of your budget planning. And if your church certainly can, you should set up ways of giving on the internet, because many people will find that they are able to give their tithes especially better through the internet, where they don't even have to think about it. Another consideration that you need to make is if you have pledges, and when you have pledges, whether or not the pledges should be signed or unsigned. Signed pledges make people more responsible. They encourage people to give, and we can follow up on signed pledges. Unsigned pledges give people a chance to give anonymously. I think it's a good idea to give people the option of whether or not to sign their pledges or not, and if they do, we can follow up on them. But it is necessary that they sit down also what they're going to be giving monthly or annually. That gives you some place to start. There must be a consideration also for the people who do not pledge. And we must also consider, when they sign the pledge, do I leave them alone, or do I follow up in 6 months to see how they're doing? All of those are questions that you ask at the beginning and are part of your overall fundraising plan. Second, you have to have clear communication. You have to think, well, how are we going to get the needs of the congregation out to the congregation? How can they be clearly stated? What will be paid and when? How will that money be spent? The concept of proportional giving, I think, must be clearly stated. That's, in other words, tithing. That needs to be a rule of thumb for giving for everybody, and it needs to be encouraged. That's largely a matter of faith. Some people are not comfortable with tithing. We need to help make them comfortable, help them see that you can tithe because God will provide for all your need. and then encourage them to give as their faith increases. But all of this has to be clearly communicated, as well as where the money is going to. I think budgets are important fundraising tools because they show people that we are good at being able to manage what we have. A third aspect of any fundraising plan is going to be, how do we assess the giving that is going on? It will take a year or two actually to assess that giving. This is where the term pay-up percentage comes. A pay-up percentage is simply the amount of money that actually will be taken in that is pledged. There's a certain number of people that will pledge and not give. But what that percentage is differs from the congregation to congregation. It takes 2 or 3 years to be able to establish what the pay-up percentage is in the congregation where you serve. But over time, by tracking giving, by assessing giving, you will have a much more realistic picture of what your people will actually give. People like to give, they want to give, but sometimes they don't give. And focusing on assessing the giving. And also, when we give statements about pledges, we're helping people assess their giving as well. Did they do as well in giving as they thought they should? Are they willing to do more? Will they catch up on their giving? All of these things need to be taken as part of what we need to look at.